fashion. So just by the look of the cover page, does any one of you know who this woman is or the background picture? If you know her, put in the chat box, or if not, don't worry. Oh, Coco Chanel, Char. Yeah, it's Coco Chanel. So we're gonna get to know more about her later. So next, a little background about me. I'm Cleo Padayao. I'm a visual merchandiser in H&M Ayala, Cebu. So I mainly handle Divided and H&M Home. And I also graduated fashion branding and merchandising in FIDA, Cebu. And after graduating, I worked as a freelance stylist. So what will we be discussed in this presentation? So first, women's wear evolution from 1900s to 1990s. So that's gonna be the scope of tonight's discussion. And then second, ideal body type of each decade, signature silhouettes of each period, the fashion icons and influential designers, and historical events and how it affected fashion. So you may ask, why is it important to know your fashion history? So maybe your job is not related to fashion or you just don't care about fashion, but we have to acknowledge that clothing is a basic need. Whether you're in quarantine right now, you're still wearing clothes, right? So might as well get to know its origins. And second is to incorporate it into your personal style. So you can always draw inspiration from the past to express yourselves more in your everyday life, or maybe you have some special events after this quarantine. So just to draw some inspiration. And then third is to compare the ideal body in each decade, especially for women, because we'll see later on that in the 20th century and from the centuries before that, women's body changed drastically, even in the span of 10 years or in each decade. So we will get to know about that. So let's proceed to our very first decade, the 1900s. So this is known as the Edwardian era. So why Edwardian? Because the British monarch at that time is King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra, that's her wife. And the art style that inspired the women, but at this time, was the Art Nouveau. So Art Nouveau is very curvy and has very swirly lines, and it is very much drawn by nature. So how did they incorporate this in the silhouette of women? So they wanted to have the S-curve silhouette, and by this, they started using the S-bend corset. So as you can see in the second picture. And then the ideal look of the decade is the Gibson girl. So this is actually an illustration by Charles Gibson, an American illustrator. So imagine their ideal beauty is from an illustration. So it's even fictional. So next, and who has the body and the ideal beauty of that decade? So one famous actress here is Camille Clifford. So as you can see, she has this S-curve silhouette. So is the pace good? Or you can understand me? Yes. Maybe I'm going too fast. Okay, so one of a very famous designer during this time is Lady Lucy Gordon, or known as Lucille. Her line is known Lucille. And she's a English aristocrat also. So she actually boarded later on one of a very famous ship that sank in 1912. Can you guess what ship she boarded?
Titanic.
Yeah, Titanic. And she actually survived. Yeah. So it sank in 1912. Okay, so let's get to know the Edwardian look. So the two ladies here, they are the best example of the Edwardian look, but let's get to know its key features. So first is the cartwheel hat. So as you can see, it's a very big hat, very heavily decorated with feathers or ribbons. Some may say some birds got extinct during this time because it was so heavily decorated. And then next is the go-to hairstyle is the cottage loaf hairdo. So it's very much inspired by the Gibson girl, that what you've seen in the first slide. And then third is the shirt waist. So as you can see, that's their top, and it's very much cinched in the waist, again, to create the cinched look. And then last is the long skirts to pair with the shirt waist, and then parasol. So this is the perfect accessory for the Edwardian women. So if you wonder if ever they already have the big hat, can you guess why they still need a parasol? Can some of you guess? What's their use of the parasol? Char accessory. Okay, so actually the parasol is used to help with their balance, because as you can imagine, you have this very big hair. It's very not hair but hat, and then you are wearing this corset, so it's very tight and maybe you can't breathe, and you have this elaborate dress, so they needed a parasol to help with their balance. So okay, now we are in the 1910s. So the theme here is fashion freedom, because this was the time of the suffragettes, or the women who were fighting for their right to vote. Because if some of you know, women were treated second-class citizens during the early times, and they were not permitted to vote. And then the good news is there's a freedom from the corset. So the dramatic hourglass silhouette changed to accentuating their body's natural curves. So they got rid of the corset, but now they wanted to have this very tapered look. So as you can see on the second picture, that's the famous hobble skirt. So it's a narrow hemline skirt that is that constricted movement around the ankle. So it's very hard to walk with a hobble skirt. So we should get to know its origin. So a famous designer of this time is Paul Poiret. So he's French, and he is known for his version of the hobble skirt and the lampshade dress. So the story behind the hobble skirt, there are two stories. First is, if you look on the picture on the upper right, the lady there, she was actually the first woman who got invited to ride the airplane by one of the Wright brothers. So in order for her skirt not to blow in the wind, then one of the brothers did tie rope on her skirt. And legend says that Paul Poiret was maybe inspired by that, but I think I believe more the second theory, because by this time, Paul Poiret was very much inspired by Oriental fashion. So as you can see here, the geisha. If you can imagine the geisha ladies really walk so dainty because of the kimono, right? So this is the other theory, that Poiret was inspired by Oriental fashion, hence the hobble skirt. So the pictures on the center are the examples of his designs. Okay, so let's just get to know more the 1910s look. So first, they wear a smaller hat. So compared to its predecessors in 1900s, they wear a much smaller hat, and then the hair up, but still there is volume in the front, and then high waist to accentuate their natural curves, and then loose skirts with narrow hemline, so like the hobble skirt that we've seen. Okay, so after that, one very historic event that will shape fashion later on is the World War I. So it ran from 1914 to 1918. So of course, during wartime, they were not wearing the hubble skirt already. They did wear more comfortable and practical clothing. And these were some of the women who got enlisted or volunteered during the war. So not just men did fight in the war, some women were also enlisted. Okay, and now very much relevant and we can all relate to what they are going through. 1918 to 1919 is the Spanish flu. So it actually did not come from Spain. The story is in one of the barracks, the soldiers got sick and they were living in such crowded conditions. So if one of them got sick, then it can spread easily. And it did not help that they are traveling during the wartime. So that's why it did spread faster. Okay, so after those very tragic times, we are now welcoming the Roaring Twenties. So this is very popular because of the Great Gatsby movie. So this is the time of the prohibition. As you know, they were not allowed to drink alcoholic beverages, but there were these speakeasy bars that they can drink in secret. And this was also the time where jazz was first introduced, so that's why the 20s is dubbed as the jazz age. Okay, so after this, they are already so inspired by the current art style, which is Art Deco. It's very much the opposite of Art Nouveau. So with here, it's more about straight lines and geometric shapes. So how can they incorporate this into the women's silhouette? So now they want to have the square body or the boxy look. And in order to achieve this, they are using an undergarment called bandeau, as some of you may know is still present up to today. And a very famous designer, the one in our cover page, it's Gabrielle Coco Chanel. Again, a French designer known for her version of the little black dress. She's actually the pioneer. And that's her version of the black dress right there. One of the stories says that she was actually inspired by the uniform of her French maid. And she thought that it will work for evening wear with some pearls. And before this, black was actually the color of mourning, because the previous queen, Queen Victoria, was a widow for such a long time that she wore black towards the end of her life. But now in the 20s, people are embracing black as a color of elegance again. So let's get to know the boxy look. First, it's composed of a cloche hat, or it means belle in French. And it's very snug in their head because they wanted to create a very small head. And the bob hair. So most of the women did cut their hairs, but for those who were not so brave, they would fake the bob and just cut the front of their hairs like bangs, but with hair in their side, and they tie their hair up in a bun and they just put hats or headbands. So that's why headbands is so popular during this time. And then the shift dress. So it's a shapeless dress, and it created the boxy look that the 20s girl very much wants. And then bare arms for the very first time. They show their arms with this sleeveless dress. And then drop waist. So as you can see from the 1900s, 1910s, it was pretty much high waist. So by this period, they did drop the waistline just to create a very straight silhouette. And then next is calf or mid-calf length skirt. So contrary to what we can see in some movies, not all girls did wear their skirts in the knee length. It was just the flapper girls, or the girls that were more liberated or more experimental, because they were always in parties. So their skirts can be in knee length or above the knee. But most of the average women, their skirts were in calf or mid-calf length. And then visible legs. So for the first time, women are displaying their legs. And this is also the first time that hosiery or stockings were introduced. And when it was introduced, there was such a high demand for it, but too little supply. So some girls would just paint their legs and draw a straight line on the back so that it would look like they were wearing hosiery. So that's so interesting. Okay, so we are already in the 30s. How is it so far? Is it too much info? Or are we just good? Still learning. Okay, 30s is return to femininity. So now the silhouette is slim with natural curves. So just like Jean Harlow here, the picture in the right. So she's wearing a backless dress. As you can see, that's the first time we see backless dresses for women. And this is also the time where Hollywood glamour was so popular. So there are many Hollywood actresses that were prominent. And then on the left side, the couple right here, maybe some of you watch The Crown or are British enthusiasts, British monarch enthusiasts. Do you know who they are? Can you put in the screen? I don't know. Prince Edward though. Yeah. I thought I was alone there for a moment. Well, when you answer. Okay, so that's King Edward VIII and Mrs. Wallis Simpson. So King Edward was in line for the British throne, but then he fell in love with this American divorcee, Mrs. Wallis Simpson. And by that time, it was very scandalous, and a king is not permitted to marry a divorcee. But with that story, let's move on and let's get to know her look. So can you see what print is she wearing? Maybe I can zoom in. It's the polka dots. So that's the first time we see the polka dots print, which is still very loved until today. And by the second picture, that's the time of their wedding. And that the shade of blue is now known as the Windsor blue. Okay, so let's go to the next. A very influential designer, and her technique is still used by the designers of today, is the bias cut. So that's Madeleine Vionnet or Madame Vionnet. So she is the genius of the flowy dresses that we most know from Hollywood. Okay, so let's get to know the 1930s look. So it started off with a hat and a feminine dress, and then fur if you can afford it, and then gloves, also a must-have, and then a low hemline for modesty, and some dainty shoes. So that's the usual look of the 30s. So why fur if you can afford it? Because not all can afford, because this was also the time of the Great Depression. So that did run from 1929 to 1933. So some women were using feed sacks to create, yes, Bonnie, to create their dresses for their children or for themselves. So next is Bonnie Parker. So because it was the time of the Great Depression, maybe some were tempted to rob. So Bonnie Parker is from the famous duo Bonnie and Clyde. So she's from the 1930s. So from all of that tragic happenings, the Great Depression, there were some women who wanted to have inspiration. So this is another influential designer, Elsa Schiaparelli, an Italian designer. And she was pretty much inspired by surrealism. So as you can see in the picture on the right. And these are the three of her famous dresses: the skeleton dress, lobster dress, and the tears dress. So even though the 30s is the time of femininity, some women did not conform. So as we know, the famous pilot Amelia Earhart is wearing pants in this picture. And also Marlene Dietrich. So she is German, but is an actress in America. And she wears pantsuits in her everyday life. And even the mayor of Paris warned her that she will get banned in the city if she wore a pantsuit in public. But she did not care and still wore pantsuits. So we can be inspired by her. So welcome to the 40s, the time of the utilitarian fashion, because this was the time of the Second World War that was from 1913 to 1945. So everyone was encouraged to participate in the war effort. So 3 women can do 3 things. So they can be civilians. So as civilians, they use the utilitarian clothing because textiles were rationed during this time. And why was it rationed? Because textile was needed for the uniforms of soldiers or for parachutes or for the tents during the war. And then the clothes were standardized. So the length of the skirt or the sleeves or how deep the pockets, it was all standardized, again, to maximize textile. And then second is uniforms for those women who enlisted and volunteered during the war. So again, unlike the World War I, some women did also fight in the war. And then third is war work clothing. So with most of the men gone for war, who were left to work in the factories or shipyards. So these were the women. And they needed something practical for working. So that's why this was the first time overalls was introduced and headscarves were used to protect their hairs from getting caught in the heavy machinery. So what was the ideal body during this time? So you needed to be strong and toned for you to be ready for war or working in the factories. So just like the pinup girls. So the 2 pinup girls during this time is Rita Hayworth. So she's the one there with the red swimsuit. And Betty Grable. So that's the girl on the right side. That's both her. And Betty Grable is sporting the hairdo of the 40s, which is called the Victory Rolls. So you can see in the upper right. And then on the lower left, the illustration, Rosie the Riveter. So we can still see that message up to today, right? And if you're wondering its origin, it came from World War II. It represented the women working in factories and shipyards. So let's just take a look closer in the utilitarian look. So first, it starts with a dramatic hat. because accessories were not rationed during this time. So women can still express themselves during through accessories. And then second, the victory rolls, again, the very famous hairstyle, and then padded shoulders. So it did create a very strong silhouette and almost like a uniform. And then a fitted waist, knee-length hemlines. So I guess that was the standard length for the skirts, and then platform shoes for them to be comfortable. Okay, is it too much? Can I hear from you guys? Are you learning, or maybe that was too much? Learning. There's no problem with the audio. Okay, so let's just review from the 1900s to 1940s. So first, in the 1900s, again, the S-curve silhouette. The 1910s, they ditched the corset but wanted to create this tapered look, thus the hubble skirt. The 20s, they wanted to create a boxy look. And then 30s, they wanted something feminine again. And then 40s, they were sporting the utilitarian look. So I'll just zoom in the 30s and 40s because that's where a lot of people are confused. So 30s, again, very feminine, as you can observe with the with her sleeves and her shoulders. But 40s, it's with a padded shoulders, almost like a uniform. Okay, so let's go to the next. So in 1945, the war was over. So what do we do now? So people were looking something new. That's why in 1947, Christian Dior created this new look. So that's the one here in the center. And that was also the one in our cover page. But not all women can afford a Dior, but one of those women is Eva Peron, or she was the first lady in Argentina, and she was also known as Evita. So in one of the stories after the war, she went to Paris, and then she was still wearing this feminine looks of the 30s. But then the French press did mock her. So she famously said that, "Give me Dior." That's why their partnership started. So we are now in the mid-century, in the 1950s. So again, inspired by Dior's silhouette with the new look, the ideal body now is an hourglass body, but with pointy breast. So they achieved this with the girdle. And so a difference, it's like pretty much like a corset, but a difference between corset and girdle is that the corset, you tie it, there are laces, and then corset, you just slide it in, like the Spanx that we know of today. But not all women have hourglass figure like Marilyn Monroe here. So other women like Audrey Hepburn also embraced her natural body. So a long and tapered look was also popular. And this is Audrey Hepburn in her movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, as you know. This was already in 1961, but I just chose this picture because this is so iconic. And this exemplifies the long and tapered look. And the genius behind this is Hubert de Givenchy, a French designer that pretty much designed her looks in her movies. And if you did not see her movies yet, I recommend that you should really see it because the costumes are so nice. And another look re-emerging from hiding, Gabrielle Coco Chanel. She was hiding in Switzerland because legend has it she was a Nazi spy during the war. But she can't help herself. She wanted to create another look again. So she created this look the cardigan suit in the left side. So that's pretty much the Chanel look that we know until today. And a very famous wearer of this look is Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. And this was her look during the time that JFK was assassinated. This was in 1963, but I just put this picture because she is famous for her Chanel suit. Okay, and with all those silhouettes, I think this toy is very iconic and will pretty much influence the new generation of girls. So this is Barbie, the vintage Barbie. So she was created in the 50s, and as you can see, in her swimsuit here, there's an illusion that gives her having a pointy breast and the hourglass figure, pretty much inspired by Dior's look. So let's just again get to know the new look. So I start off with a hat, a set hair. As you can see, they have very elaborate hairstyles to go with the hat. And then pointy breast, so again achieved by the girdle, and the cinched waist. And then gloves, a full skirt to create that perfect new look, and then pointy closed shoes. Okay, so we are now in the 60s. So let's just get to know what happened during this time. So by this time, this is the time of the Vietnam War. That was from 1955 to 1975. And this was also the height of the civil rights movement from the 50s to 60s. And one of its popular leader is Martin Luther King. So with all those injustice and violence going on, this created the counterculture of the 60s. As maybe some of you wonder why the peace sign is so popular in the 60s. So this is why they didn't want violence. So they protested against that. And with all of those violence, they wanted to exemplify innocence. So they wanted to create this very childlike and skinny silhouette. And pretty much the perfect girl for this look was Twiggy. So she was a British model that was popular during this time. And I just want to highlight the makeup look of the 60s. So by this time, they did put a black eyeliner on their lids to create like a deep set eyes, and then a lot of false eyelashes, and at the top and bottom, and they even draw eyeliner at the bottom. As you can see, the three last line that was drawn in. And this is to create a very doll-like appearance. So the theme is like very childlike, a doll. So that was the 60s ideal look. And one of the it girls of the 60s, Jane Birkin. So she's sporting her baby doll dress. So the dress in the 60s is called baby doll dress. And she's carrying this basket, so which acts as her bag because she can't find the perfect leather bag because she said she had too much stuff. But then that changed when she boarded a plane with the creator of Hermes. So the famous Hermes Birkin was made for her. Next, so let's just get to know the color palette of the 60s. So as you can see, it's very neon, very colorful. There are a lot of pop of colors. This was also very inspired by the use of psychedelics or hallucinogenic drugs, which created very bright colors. And the phrase flower power was also introduced. And then pop art was very prominent during this time. And the Beatles was very popular and very much idolized by the young people. So by this, that the very first time, it wasn't the designers that were dictating what was the look of the season. So the designers did look into what were the girls were wearing in Carnaby Street. So this was considered the center of mod culture or the modern culture. So what were the trendy girls wearing in Carnaby Street? And one of those clothes were the mini skirt. So Mary Kwan just adapted it and produced her own version of it. So she claimed that she did not design it. It was already worn by the girls in Carnaby Street. And as you can see in the pictures, that's her collection. So it's like so childlike. They are just playing with this colorful colors. So that's a reoccurring look in the 60s. So let's just get to know the mod look. So a very popular hairstyle is the pixie cut, sported by Twiggy here. Doll-like eyes, again, created by the eyeliner and false eyelashes. Baby doll dress. So it did look like the dress was too small for her. So it's very childlike. And tights and doll shoes. So that was the perfect mod look. Okay, so we are now in the 70s. So let's just look what is happening here. So a lot of tragedies. First, the Vietnam War was still going on. The Vietnam War ended in 75. A gas shortage, a rise of anarchy groups, and the president at that time, Nixon, resigned. The Jonestown Massacre. So just a little bit story if you're not familiar. A leader or a preacher did let his followers drink Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. And that was considered one of the biggest mass suicide during that time. And it's also during the time where serial killers were on the rise. So like Ted Bundy, which is popular now because of a documentary on Netflix. If you don't know him, then you should see about him in Netflix. So what is their answer to all those tragedies? So they wanted to escape into trance. So in the 70s, there are a lot of trends going on. So this is, the 60s was also the last time that we can point out a distinct look, because in the 70s, there were so much trends going on. So I'm not gonna go on in by one, but if you are interested, we can get to know them later on if we have time. But what do you think is the silhouette by this time? What is the common silhouette, go-to silhouette of women? If you can see the pictures. While I drink water, you can chat. Wide leg, flare jeans, bell-bottom pants, yes. So everything in the 70s were wide. So they have wide pants, different ladies. So they have wide pants, wide collars, wide lapels in the suits, and they have oversized dresses inspired by the gypsy. So the bohemian look was also a very trendy look of the 70s. So everything is so wide. So in order for the trend to flatter to a woman, they needed to be slim, and they also possess a very laid back attitude. So a very famous it girl here is Farrah Fawcett. So she's a famous actress, and her hairstyle there in the picture is the one that people wanted to have. That's why there were a lot of setting of hairs and curl, free the nip. Yes. So the girls there are sporting the no bra look. So as you can see from all the corsets, bandeau. So now they're not wearing bras. And one of the one of the icons of the decade is Cher. So pretty much from the 60s to 80s, Cher is always wearing the trends. She is really fearless. And one famous designer in the 70s is Yves Saint Laurent. So again, French. And he was known on his take on the 70s dress, especially the pantsuit. So the pantsuit was so prominent during this time because for the first time, women were considering a career. They were not just married off, they wanted a career for themselves. So of course, they wanted to be respected in the workplace. They needed an office look. So that's why pantsuit was very popular. But even though women were already very prominent in the workplace, there was still inequality in the salary. That's why women's liberation movement was created. So now we are in the 80s, our second to the last decade. So this is the time of the rise of capitalism. So the famous phrase, the rich are getting richer and the poor getting poorer. So in the 80s, this was so prominent, and a lot of young people were unemployed. So the rich and the poor were pretty much obsessed in becoming rich. That's why shows like Dynasty. So the first picture here, that's the original cast of Dynasty. It's about a family which were very rich and people were obsessed with them. And look at the second picture, the tagline, "Greed is good." So that was the theme of the 80s. Everything wanted more. Dynasty, yes, that's the original Dynasty. So the 80s is just all about excess. So nothing is too much. So too much colors, your hair can't be too big, prints all over. Shoulder pads were again used. And puff sleeves was also very prominent. So in order for you to exemplify this look, everything too excessive, you needed to be tall and toned. So a famous actress here in the 80s is Brooke Shields. So that's her in the two pictures on the left. And this was also the time that thick eyebrows was popular. And during the 80s, there was an aerobics craze. So women were very active. And Jane Fonda, the third picture here, she has a famous exercise video. And that's why leg warmers, headbands, or tights were so popular during this time. People even incorporated it in their personal style. And famous designer is Vivienne Westwood. So remember the punk rock trend in the 70s? She was a pioneer on punk rock together with her boyfriend Malcolm X, if I remember. And in the 80s, she introduced the new romantic. So as you can see in the second picture, those were the looks that she created. And stonewashed denim or acid wash denim was also widely used in the 80s. And hip hop was also for the first time so popular. So remember the 80s look with a boombox, a very big boombox. So that was the 80s. And for the first time, activewear was worn into streetwear. So we are very much guilty of this also. So brands like Adidas or Nike was used as streetwear. So now we are in the 90s, the last decade. So are you guys still good? We are in the last decade. So the 90s was just pretty much the answer to the 80s. If the 80s were so excessive, then the 90s generation realized less is more, and greed was definitely not good. So they embraced more their natural looks and minimal look. The popular look is a minimal look, but in order to flatter you with that minimal look, you needed to be skinny. So like Kate Moss here, she was very popular, a popular model. And this was also the time where the 90s supermodels were introduced. So that's them, the original 5 in the left picture. And if you talk about 90s, you will really know that it's about the 90s grunge. So this collection was a collection of Marc Jacobs in the 90s. He was still starting out, as you can see. That's him on the center. And it was not so well accepted by the fashion industry, but he proved them wrong because grunge was on the craze in the 90s. So the runways also evolved from wearable fashion to conceptual art. So designers like Comme des Garçons, which was already present in the 80s, and Alexander McQueen. So his fashion shows were very ahead of its time. Like the girl here, she was just wearing a white dress, and then there were robot hands, I guess, and then they spray painted with the dress. So this was pretty much a form of art. So if you wonder if the fashion industry appreciates avant-garde looks, this is why. Because if you know your fashion history, then I think you've pretty much seen all the looks. So that's why we can appreciate if a designer tries to introduce another silhouette. Okay, so we are now full circle. So that was it. But we can review the 50s to 90s. So again, 50s, Dior's new look, very hourglass. 60s, very childlike and skinny, like Twiggy. 70s were the decade where trends were born. And very wide silhouette, like a wide leg pants. And then 80s, everything goes. It's a matter of excess. Nothing is too much, like Madonna here. And then 90s, it's all about grunge and minimal looks. Okay, so that's all. And someone said movie recommendation. So these are the movies that you can watch if you're interested. You can screenshot it if you want. Which one is your favorite and least favorite year of fashion trend? I have to say my favorite is the 60s and least favorite the 30s because of the hubble skirt. Like, I can't imagine why women did wear that. Okay, so I just want to leave a quote from Mary Kwan. The fashionable woman wears clothes, the clothes don't wear her. So this is pretty much the message that I want to say to all women, that in every decade, there's always gonna be the body, the ideal beauty. So might as well embrace what you have, because the society will always constantly give pressure for you to be perfect. Amen, yes. So that's it. Just get in touch with me. Styling by Cleo. I have a Facebook page for my portfolio, and Cleo Padayao in Instagram. So that's it. That's the end of my talk. I'm just gonna flash the silhouette, so if ever you have questions,